Hey, everybody, welcome back to another amazing episode of the Relentless Goal Achievers podcast. I'm super stoked about what we're going to talk about today. Topic is insane. It's something that has made the news lately with a certain movie that came out, but I'm so glad that it did because we're talking about sex trafficking and trafficking altogether. Now, before I get into it, if you're not in the Facebook community, get over there. It's Relentless Goal Achievers Facebook community. There's some free gifts, some awesome conversations. Hope to connect with you in there. All right, without further ado, let me introduce my very special, amazing guest, Jenna Mckaye. She is a survivor of human trafficking with an incredible story. Today, she trains hospital staff, law enforcement agencies, and other first responders on how to identify victims of sex trafficking and labor trafficking. Jenna speaks on this topic around the world. She even spoke in front of the United Nations, which is pretty amazing. She lives now to prevent sex trafficking through her Jenna Mckaye Foundation. Jenna, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, this is so cool. We actually met because we were both speakers at the Great American Summit in Texas. So I got to hear your story firsthand on stage. And I mean, I couldn't hold back tears. And, it's just incredible what you went through, but what's even more incredible is who you are today. So as much as I would rather not relive your story, I think it'll be really good for the audience to hear. Do you mind sharing what happened to you?
Yeah, so the short version is, I wasn't a kid that you might necessarily picture to become a victim of trafficking. I grew up in Southern California. The year I was trafficked, it was said to be one of the safest communities in Southern California. I went to a private Christian school. I had two parents at home. My dad was a farmer. My mom was a teacher. Two big sisters. And by the time that I was 12, they were both off at college. And I met my trafficker in high school. And he also wasn't somebody you would picture to become a trafficker. He had a stepdad that was a pastor and a chief in the Navy. His biological dad was a CHP officer. His mom had a successful business in the community. And he got just, put it shortly, caught up in the wrong crowd. And he graduated a year before me and lured me out of high school my senior year with false.
Real quick, Jen, I'm sorry to interrupt you. How do you define trafficker?
So a trafficker is somebody that forces somebody to have sex or labor through force, fraud, and coercion. If they're a child, at least in the state of California, force, fraud, and coercion don't have to be at play. They're automatically a victim of human trafficking. So anybody that uses threats, violence, coercive techniques, manipulation to force somebody into doing something they don't want to do, and they're profiting off of that, whether it's money or something else that has monetary value, they're a trafficker.
Got it. Okay. So you met him in high school.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and we kind of dated off and on, kind of secretly. My dad was pretty strict about that. And my senior year, he lured me out. And so I was headed to play college volleyball. Like, I started training at 12, was following in one of my big sister's footsteps, who got a scholarship and played in college. And that was when I moved in with him, that I started to see more of the criminal activity he's involved in that I wasn't aware of. And through all of that, he learned about selling and that a drug you can sell once, but a human you can sell over and over again, and that's more profitable. And so, it wasn't necessarily a typical trafficking situation that most people hear of. He advertised me online and sold me out of the apartment. And I was 10 minutes down the road from my private Christian school, from my family. And that's something that I really discuss, like in trainings to law enforcement. Like, why didn't you just walk down the street and get help? he went to great lengths to separate me from my family and my support system, even though he didn't physically move me to like another country or another state. So, you know, he got a restraining order against my dad. By this point, I had been arrested and shamed by police officers, which just reinforced what my trafficker was saying, that they're not there to help you, they're against you. And so really felt stuck and scared, and also didn't know. I was 17. I just turned 18. I was turned 18 in December, and I was graduating high school in June, and I was already with him. And just a kid, and I'd never been educated, not even on like really domestic violence and unhealthy dating relationships, definitely not human trafficking. So things that led up to that point, like having me branded, I didn't understand what that meant, and what his plans were for me.
What was the brand?
His name. He took me to Tijuana, Mexico, and had me branded. It was very, it wasn't like, ooh, let's get a tattoo of your name. You know, it was force. I was crying and asking for them to stop. The tattoo artist kept going. Very traumatic experience. And that was right before he started selling me.
Where did they put the tattoo on you?
On my back. And traffickers will do that. They'll put them anywhere on their body. I've seen victims have here above their eyebrow, on their neck, inside their lip, anywhere on their body. I was training hospital staff in New Jersey, and our doctor came up to me and said, I had a girl come through my emergency room that needed an exam, and there was a tattoo on her private parts, and most likely she was a victim of sex trafficking. So what it is it's not an actual brand. In the trafficking world, we call it branding. It's a tattoo that just basically it's a way of a trafficker taking ownership of their victim.
So you said he was advertising you online. Like, what does that mean?
So, I mean, nowadays, like, this was 2006. So now it's like back in the day, you know, when before human trafficking, it was referred to as prostitution, and you'd have a pimp or a trafficker and a victim, like maybe walking the streets or going into a casino. Where now it's all done online mostly. And so even then, 2006, it wasn't on pages like now, like Backpage or other websites that advertise women and children, but like what he used was sex chat rooms, Craigslist, things like that, anywhere where somebody's looking for where they can purchase a woman.
So where you were inside of his apartment, or where were most of the sexual acts conducted?
It was all inside the apartment until the very last time that I was sold.
How many times would you say you were sold?
9 times.
17, 18 years old?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, mine didn't happen every night or every weekend. So like there would be a time period where I would think, oh, this isn't going to happen anymore. And then it would happen again. And he was really just getting started. He was just learning about this. I knew that after the last time, which was in a hotel room, and it was the most horrific time, that scared me, because I'm like, oh, he's not stopping, and this is just going to escalate.
These men that would come in, would they know that this is against your will, or were you drugged? Like, I would imagine that a woman who's being raped would put up a fight.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
What's your mentality at that point? Like, first time that happened, some stranger comes in to have sex with you. Were you told to act a certain way? Were you shocked? Like,
Mm-hmm. So just so the audience kind of understands, so a lot of times what a trafficker will do is what they call breaking in, where they will beat the victim until almost into submission, and just beat them and do torturous acts to them. And then also they are often trafficking with other women, which is called a stable. And they'll have what is called a bottom girl who's been with the trafficker the longest. And she'll kind of show the new girl what to do and how to behave and how to dress and things like that. That's not what my scenario was like at all. He never even sat me down and said, this is what we're going to do. This is how I'm going to make extra money. I had no idea he even advertised me online. So the first night, a stranger came to the door, which because of all the other criminal activity that he was involved in wasn't new to me, didn't think much of it. And then he invited him in. And that's when I was taken to the room and raped. And it was very forced, very violent. It's almost as if he advertised me for a fantasy that some sickos might have of, hey, come rape my wife and you can pay for it.
So at that point, this was your boyfriend. Like you had no
By this point, he had married me. And that was,
Your
and I
husband?
really would clarify, like, because some people go, oh, your husband. I never even refer to him as my husband. It was not a romantic, we didn't have even a wedding. It was very, I mean, for me, it's like I was still a child. It almost felt like a forced marriage. It was his way of manipulating and keeping more control of me. And so, yes, I was legally married to him. But that was more of his way of just having more control.
Were you still having a relationship with him as you're being raped by other men?
I mean, on what you can call a relationship, I was terrified.
I mean, like sexual relationship.
Oh yeah, he was already very sexually abusive, and domestically abusive before he started trafficking.
Holy shit. 9 times. What happened the last time?
So the last time was the most violent. By this point, I mean, I hate to say the worst because they were all horrific, but this was in a motel room, in a Motel 6. And it was the first time I experienced a beating. It lasted all night. And I remember that night, like, the buyer left early in the morning and I had gotten up and looked at myself in the mirror, and I'd never seen myself beaten up before. I'd never been physically beaten. And I mean, that was a real wake up call to see myself that way. Like, and I remember walking down, my trafficker was waiting in the parking lot and walking down to the car. And he looked at me and saw me in that condition and just said, well, I guess you have to call into work. And, there was another point not long after that. My weight trainer that I had since I was 12 years old, he trained my big sister. We were at a stoplight. My trafficker was driving. I was in the passenger seat and he pulled up in the car next to us. And I remember looking at him, wanting to yell out for him, wanting him to hug him. And instead, I sunk back into the seat so that he wouldn't see me. And it's just kind of an example to get people's head around, like, why wouldn't you just call out for help? He saw me as this athletic girl headed to play college ball with so much potential, smart, buff, right? I didn't want him to see me like that. It wasn't that I didn't want him. It wasn't that and I've had conversations with him since saying, I already knew the answer, but I needed it kind of for my own healing. Like, hey, Mark, would you have helped me? And of course he would have.
How did you get out of that situation, Jenna?
So, because that last time was so horrific, I really, it scared me even more than I was already scared. And, I really felt like, oh my gosh, I could die. And I had a phone call. I kept in touch with my family, but not very much. They had no idea I was being trafficked. They definitely figured domestic violence situation. And I had a phone call with one of my big sisters. And on that phone call, she said, Jenna, you can always come home. And it really didn't occur to me until she said that. I was like, I can? Like, that's an option? And I kind of started building this like escape plan in my head. And I had an amazing 6th grade teacher who, when I was in her class in 6th grade, very much, she of course cared about my academics, but more valued being the girl that stood up for the kid that was bullied and things like that. And she really just was, how we all have that one teacher, right? And she kept in touch with me over the years. She'd send me cards on my birthday, even after I was a high school dropout. She never judged, never anything. And that made me feel like I could reach out to her. And I felt like I needed my GED to get away. I felt like I'm like, what do I do now? I have a criminal record. I'm a high school dropout. I have all this trauma. Like, how do you just start a new life? What happens now? Where do I go? What do I do? And I reached out to her, and she did not know I was being trafficked. But she helped me study and pass my GED test, which essentially helped me get away from him. And I called a meeting with his stepdad, his mom, and my dad, and my trafficker at his stepdad's church. And all I said was, he's growing and selling marijuana out of the apartment, and I want a divorce.
Oof.
And they all like went, oh, we understand. And I just remember thinking, wow, if you only knew.
Why
And
did
I
you
promised
tell
him
them?
it was mostly fear of him.
Mm.
I mean, when you are being abused in that way, it's so psychological, the fear and manipulation they put into you. And I just wanted to keep him happy so that I could get away and move on with my life. And I promised him, I said, I'll never tell anybody. And I think he really believed that I never would.
Were you being drugged at that time?
No, he was selling like prescription drugs, and there probably was other drug activity that I wasn't even aware of. I was just in survival mode. But there was a lot of marijuana and drinking around.
Wow. So now you've got the divorce, you're out of that situation, but I mean the amount of trauma and rape and sexual abuse, and how how did you get through that?
So I went to an urgent care, really kind of seeking help, because I was not well. I was when I went into that urgent care, I was about 100 pounds. My hair was falling out in clumps. I had my branding. I had various stages of bruising. I was acting erratic. And that's why I love training hospital staff now, because all I wanted was I needed somebody to sit down and say, Jenna, what happened to you?
Mm.
And then to follow it up with, we have law enforcement that will take care of him. We have victims advocates that will help you, not just now with your healing, and will connect you to a victims compensation fund and the healing journey and therapy, and help you rebuild your life. If somebody told me that, I would have been like, I know, I've thought this through a million times. I'd have been like, hell yeah, count me in. What do I need to do? I would have been a cooperative victim. But nobody did that. Everybody was talking around me, and nobody was talking to me. And I felt judged, and I felt like there was assumptions, like I was a runaway or a drug addict, which even if I was, I needed support and resources. And so I left that urgent care thinking, well, I guess nobody cares. I guess I'll never tell anybody, and I'll just try to start my life over. And because not getting the resources I need, and not knowing that I had undiagnosed complex PTSD, trying to start my life over, I got a job. I went back to school, but that kind of trauma, you don't just live a normal life. Like, I would leave my college class and go in the bathroom and have panic attacks. And I would try to cope in really unhealthy ways, like drinking and drugs and being promiscuous, and couldn't cope with the trauma. So, long story short, eventually I met somebody. He was a Marine from Detroit, complete opposite of my trafficker. And we fell in love and married. And I thought that I was rebuilding my life. But I still had all my trauma.
What did that do to your marriage?
So he deployed to Iraq, came back 9 months later, and then we were stationed to Quantico Marine Base, which really felt exciting to me. I was going to be on the other side of the country. I loved being a military wife. I loved making friends with women from around the country. As soon as we got there, I found out we were pregnant with our son. So excited to be a mom. And really still experiencing quietly behind closed doors my trauma. So I would have flashbacks, nightmares, things like that, but just wanted to push it down and move forward. And when I was pregnant with my son, I was about 4 months pregnant. I found out that my trafficker died. And, when I've shared my story over the years, I think sometimes people try to imagine how they would feel in the situation, which I think is almost impossible to do.
Oh yeah.
Oh, he's dead, you must feel revenge, you must feel happy, you must feel relief. I felt anger. Um, Not necessarily angry he was dead, but I felt a different kind of anger I never experienced before, which was, in that moment, I thought, now nobody will ever know. I felt like I was stuck with this secret for some reason. And also, I pictured his funeral and everyone getting up on stage and saying wonderful things about him, which you do at a funeral. And that just pissed me off because I knew who he really was and what he really did to me. So it led me to go to therapy, but I wasn't honest with my therapist. I brushed it under the rug. My same old story. I was married to an abusive guy at 18.
Why did you think you did that? Why did you go to therapy? I mean, figured you needed help, you felt the anger, but then what was it? What do you think that was that didn't allow you to tell them the whole truth?
Um, I think that there was a lot to it. I think that if I brought it all up, it made it more real again. What would my husband think? He knew that I was married to an abusive guy. He did not know about the trafficking. Really, nobody did. I might have let a little bit out to some people, but not, and I just wanted to live my normal life. I wanted to feel better inside. I knew I didn't feel good inside, which led to the therapy, but it wasn't for another 2 years that I'd finally come out with it.
With the same therapist?
No. I had a doctor's appointment and I'd been to the doctor plenty of times by this point. I'd given birth by this point. But anytime I had any kind of pelvic exam or routine checkup, I'd have a panic attack. And nobody ever said anything about it until this doctor. And she pulled me in her office after. And she said, Jenna, have you ever been sexually abused? And I was shocked. I was like, this was 6 years after being trafficked. And I was like a happy mom, wife, like fit. I was like, how does she know? Because I went to the doctor when I got away from him looking the way I did. Nobody said anything. And I wasn't like I just came out and said, oh, yes, I was married at 18 and all these things happened. Help me. But by identifying me and asking me that, she stirred things up. And that led me to, a few months later, driving myself to the emergency room with a breakdown.
Your poor husband, he must have been like, he had no idea what you were going through. Not your poor husband, the poor like marriage, right? Like he doesn't know what you're going through. He can't help you. By the way, did you still have the tattoo on your back at that point?
Yes. When we were dating, when I was dating my husband, then husband, we got it covered up.
Okay.
Quick little story about that though, that's actually kind of cool. My son, he's now 13, but when he was about 6, the tattoo that it's covered up, it's faded. It needs to be retouched. And if you look closely enough, you'll see the letters under there. And he was looking at my back and my different tattoos, and he was looking closely at that one. He said, "What's that, Mama?" And I've always been very honest with him, in whatever age he is and what his brain can understand, and just keep it simple. And I said, well, before your daddy, there was somebody that did bad things to mommy, and that's why that's there. And he kind of just accepted it and went back to playing with his Legos. And then he looked up at me and said, so that's why you help the sad girls now? I mean, like 6 years old, put it together. Just a really cool moment. So,
Wow. What a story. I'm so glad you're okay now and you're with us and you got through it. Anything else we should know about your transition or kind of working through the trauma that we haven't covered?
yeah, I think to kind of finish it off, because it didn't really end there, I went to the emergency room. I said I wasn't really depressed or suicidal or anything like that. I just wanted some help, thinking they'd offer me like a different kind of therapist or psychiatrist. They described a place. I had seen the movie Girl Interrupted. I was like, I'm good. long story short, went to the psychiatric hospital. And that's a whole story in itself. But I came out with what happened to me through art therapy. And I had a great team that rushed in and helped, and told me that what I had was complex PTSD, and that what I had survived was called human trafficking, which both kind of blew my mind. But having the terms and understanding what happened to me and what I was experiencing in my mind is what helped the healing journey. So yeah, I stayed there. I did the work. I started the real hard work of healing. Went to all the therapies. And even one point the psychiatrist sent me home. I went back. He's tried to send me home again. I kept myself there because I could feel the work there working, as scary as that place was. And then once I got out, we were stationed back to Camp Pendleton in Southern California. And then 4 months later, my husband left. And that was a whole new rock bottom. Because now even though I'd started my healing journey with the trafficking, now I'm experienced this enormous heartbreak, and my family falling apart. And then also on top of that, becoming a single mom, living in what I refer to as the cockroach apartment, having Christian's little bed next to mine, working 3 jobs, which was 3 years of that was just exhausting and hard on its own. And then what I did after 3 years is I packed everything I owned into a horse trailer and drove north and started the work that I do now.
Why do you think that marriage didn't work out?
Well, I mean, I know that it's a lot of the trafficking. Obviously, coming out with that was hard for him, and my trauma coming out was hard for him. But even before that, we were so young, and neither of us, he already had his trauma that he hadn't dealt with childhood. And we're not ready for a marriage, let alone a military marriage. Loved each other, but I was not ready to make that kind of commitment, and neither was he. So I don't know even if I never came out with the trafficking, I don't know if we would have lasted. It's hard to say. We co-parent now pretty well. But yeah, that was definitely a hard time.
Is he still in the military or is he out now?
He's out now.
Okay. And lives in California near you somewhere?
No, he's in Texas, and we kind of fly Christian around. And
hey, that's awesome. Good for you for being able to do that. Wow. So, okay. So describe the work you're doing now. So you left there. It's interesting how everything's leading to you living this purposeful life that you're living now. So you leave this, 3 years of just hell being a single mom. You get back closer to your family. And what happens? How do you uncover this? How did you uncover that this is what you're meant to do?
Yeah. So really so basically I was so exhausted, and I was working jobs that I kind of liked. I love riding horses. I was giving horseback riding lessons, working at a ranch. I was coaching volleyball, so I didn't get to go off and play college volleyball. At least I could help other girls do that. After 3 years of that, I was like kind of done. Like I was like, this isn't leading anywhere. This is exhausting. This isn't what I want to do. I had a great boyfriend at the time. He was like the boyfriend in Aaron Brockovich, right? Like I would come home and he'd be like cleaning the house and fixing things. And there was a lot of people throughout my journey that came in and helped during different times.
By the way, I'm gonna throw this out there, and some people will find this funny, some won't. Being in Florida now, that's what I picture every boyfriend in California to be like. Cleaning the house and doing all the stuff women are doing normally. Okay, so go ahead.
Yeah.
Making lunches for you for the week.
By personal testimony, not all, but there's a select few.
I'm kidding. I know got some good men.
But yeah, when I was in the psychiatric hospital, one of the things they had us do was write our story down. And that was kind of to give a bird's eye view, right? The trafficking felt like my whole life. It was a year of my life.
Mm.
And I remember afterwards I closed that notebook and I put book ? And kind of just put it away. And another thing that happened in the hospital was, even though I was there for my own healing, the other women would come to me and their stories were traumatic. And I felt this connection. There was something in me. I was like, wow, maybe I could do something with girls someday. And kind of left it there. And then went on and went through the divorce and started working a bunch of jobs and could only just be in survival mode. And then my family has a ranch in Northern California, and one of the houses on the ranch opened up. And well, at that time it was a trailer. And I thought maybe I could just move there. I could have help with my son and I could do this work. And I really, to tell you the truth, I wouldn't do this now. It seems a little crazy to me that I did it because there was nothing lined up. Like, I had no idea there was a human trafficking movement. I had never even met another survivor. I was like, maybe I'll just take some classes, start going back to school and kind of see where it leads. And I quit all my jobs, packed everything I owned into that horse trailer because I'm a little redneck and I didn't have any money. By the time I moved north, I had overdrawn my account from filling up with gas. And then I sat by this lake and cried. And I called my same big sister that I called when I wanted to get away. And she's a college professor. And she said, Jenna, just take one class, even if your brain can only handle one class. And she said, volunteer, you'll make connections and network, and you'll just kind of figure out what's best for you. And so I did those things. And then I started scrubbing a lot of toilets and cleaning a lot of horse stalls, and then speaking to anybody that would listen. Got in touch with a publisher. We started that book that was started as, you know, a healing tool in the psychiatric hospital, and just worked my way up to the United Nations and to speaking and training. And I loved when I met another survivor that trained first responders. I loved that because those people at the urgent care, those doctors and nurses, man, they missed an opportunity. And that police officer that arrested me and shamed me instead of offering support and recognizing the guy next to me should have been arrested, right? And so training them how to identify a victim and see what the real situation is and how to respond with victim-centered care. And the Jenna Mckaye Foundation, horses have always been a big part of my life. My grandma's in the Cowgirl Hall of Fame, and all my family just involved in the horse world. And like, it's always been healing since I was little. So connecting victims of sex trafficking to horse therapy, which is so cool because a lot of them are from, you know, urban city areas. They've never even been around a horse, and to see them, to hear their trauma, which is heartbreaking, and to see them up on a horse smiling, like, it's just so rewarding.
What is it about horses? Because veterans with PTSD also, there are organizations that have horse therapy for them. And I got friends who really suffer from that, who have done horse therapy and absolutely love it. I mean, it's calming. It takes the stresses away. What is it about horses?
Yeah, the horse, I guess the best way I can explain it is a horse is a prey animal. So when it experiences a threat, it wants to get far away from that threat. And we as humans want the same thing. But the difference is, as soon as that threat's gone, the horse goes back to a calm, relaxed state, almost as if no trauma, nothing happened. But we stay in anger, fear, anxiety, PTSD, right? So the horse teaches them to get to that calm, relaxed state. And the horse
How does
feels
a horse teach them to do that?
well, the horse feels what they're feeling. So if you're up on a horse and you're anxious, the horse feels that. So
Yeah.
you have to learn to be calm and to not squeeze your legs and make it go. And being on the ground with the horse, you know, groundwork where you're in a round pen and the horse, the way you move your body decides where the horse goes, and to earn that respect where eventually the horse will follow you around without a lead rope. And it just teaches trust. Like, you come from a world of fear where you don't trust anybody. Everybody's bad. You have to read people to survive. You're being raped by people, and sold by somebody. And so you don't trust, there's fear around everything. So now you have to learn to trust this 1,000-pound animal. And it's just repeated doing that, and also just the responsibility that comes with taking care of a horse, and um, being outside, no cell phone, you're just connected in nature with this big animal. It is extremely healing.
Why is trusting somebody important? Especially if you've been a victim, wouldn't it be better for you to not let your guard down, to not trust people openly?
For me, I think everybody has their own healing with that. And for me, I recognize that I didn't trust anybody. And I think it's good to have good boundaries, and make sure you're letting only safe people into your life. But I recognize that every relationship I went into, whether it was a friendship, a romantic relationship, a family member, I would have my hand up like this. Like, you can get close, but not too close, because people leave and people hurt.
Mhm.
And for me, it wasn't until I found forgiveness, true forgiveness of my trafficker and buyers, that I was able to have healthy relationships in my life.
What did you do to forgive him? I mean, he was already dead.
hmm that was a hard part. And my, the rapists, I'll never know. They're just out there in the world. Um, for me, it's so cliche, but it was for me, because I was holding on to so much anger. I mean, to be very transparent and real with you, like, I used to fantasize about killing them, and to live with that anger, what it was doing to me, it was just beating me up. It wasn't beating them up. And to be in distress and crying over it and working myself up so much about it, um, it was hurting me. And when I finally got to the point where, for me, it was the healing journey. So, like, what worked for me was therapy. Um, I've been with my therapist now for 4 years, and doing the hard work every week, understanding what it did, not just to my body, but my, like, psychologically, and my nervous system, and how trauma stayed in me, and how to get it out of me. I went to an ashram and learned how to meditate from monks, which is super peaceful and calms me. I went every summer, on a backpacking trip with other survivors of trafficking, with therapists out in the wilderness, and wherein you can put your phone down and have no cell service for 6 days, and be in the wild and completely present in your healing. Life changing every summer. Just and that also gives me my power back, because every week I'm showing up for myself. And when I do that, it gives them less power. And when I forgive, it also doesn't mean that it minimizes what they did. I can still even be pissed off about it. But I use that anger now to do things like pass laws for harsher penalties against traffickers, not to beat myself up.
So your sister's advice to take one class, what did that lead to?
That led to, I took a sociology class, and I now work with that professor. And that led to volunteering, which led to the speaking and training, and finding a speech coach, and now, learning all different kinds of things, like consulting and being a part of documentary films. My book finally getting closer, being done. A movie, they optioned my story for a film. Uh, and it just was one more step in my journey of, oh, I can do this. I can not only heal, but I can hopefully have an impact, um, for people that have been through this kind of trauma.
Wow. Kudos to you. I mean, what a journey, right? It seems
Yeah.
like I'm looking at it. Maybe you don't see this the way I see it, because you said kind of like a bird's eye view, but it seems like God just whispers to you, like, book question mark, like, maybe I could do this. Like, that's not your thought, that you became
Mm-mm.
aware of the thought, but that thought came from somewhere. And it's really, really awesome that you listened to it, and continue down that road. I just saw a picture of you online with Governor Newsom in California, and you helped pass a certain bill. You want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. So last year, Senator Grove, she's from down in Kern County. It was SB 1042, which was to make trafficking a serious violent felony.
Was it not before?
It was already a felony, but being under a serious felony gives harsher penalties.
Okay.
And a strike. So in California's 3-strike law, if you already have 2 strikes, you get a third, you're going away for a long time. And
That for
traffickers
life?
are sometimes, yeah,
Okay.
depending on what happens in the court. But for example, like there was a trafficker in Orange County and he got 8 years. Well, when he got out, he went to another county, lured girls out of high school and trafficked them. If he had had a harsher penalty, those girls might not have even experienced that trauma, right? So we want to put them away longer. So this year that last year didn't even make it past the first committee, the public safety committee. So this year we brought it back, SB 14, and it made it through all the committees. There was a no in the middle, and then there was like international, like China was pissed and outrage about it. And so they held a meeting and on the floor and voted again and voted yes.
Why was there no, like, why, who is sitting there like, yeah, I don't think traffickers should have a harsher penalty?
So there was a lot of different things thrown around. I'll give you an example of one and my perspective. One of them said it takes a lot of money to house a trafficker, to house them, to imprison them. And my instant thought as a survivor is, so because my community never identified me, right, in that urgent care, I didn't get help and get the resources I needed. It wasn't until a few years ago that I met a doctor in Sacramento, and he has a human trafficking clinic. And he was the first doctor in like 12 years to sit me down, listen to what happened that last time I was sold, and to do a proper diagnosis of my back. Because when I experienced that beating, he caused trauma to my back and I wasn't taken to the hospital. Therefore, it got worse. So it's great. I got the diagnosis. I do all these things, chiropractic care, OMT therapy, all these things that relieve it. So I go into the chiropractor, he adjusts me, gives me some relief to the pain. Problem is, I walk around the corner to the receptionist and I take out my wallet with my personal money and pay for what my trafficker and my rapist did to me 17 years ago. And psychologically, I mean, that just pisses you off. Pisses me off. It should piss everybody else off too. No victim should have to pay for what their trafficker or rapist was done to them. And so when they said, oh, it costs a lot of money, I'm like, yeah, it costs me a lot of money as the victim. Like, I don't care. There's no price that it thankfully it passed. And Senator Grove, well, she did an amazing job, her staff, and working on this bill was super healing for me also. It kind of felt like my own form of justice. There was a DA I worked with a lot, and I told him halfway through, I said, I didn't understand all this and how the legislative process works, but you had me feeling smart. Like, I felt like I could go to law school, and I need you to know how
Oh, is
much
that
that
another
meant to me.
new tip? Hey, Jenna, go to law school.
Maybe I'll be probably like 50, but
All right.
but I told him that. I said, my trafficker used that against me. He said, you're not smart, Jenna. You're a high school dropout. You'll never go anywhere. And to be feeling that way meant a lot to me. And I also told him, I said, since I'm just a single mom and I'm not a lawyer, I just work for them, I expect all of you at the DA's office to refer to me as Erin Brockovich. And okay, Erin. And just to have that moment where, do you know the movie For Love of the Game with Kevin Costner?
About no.
Baseball.
Nope. There was a basketball movie For Love of something, but no.
Oh, okay. So For Love of the Game with Kevin Costner, it was the baseball one where he's a pro baseball player. And there's a scene in the movie where he's pitching and he says to himself, clear the mechanism. And what happens in the movie is the whole crowd of people saying nasty stuff and yelling, everybody talking to him, trying to get his attention, all of it completely goes silent and almost out of his view. And he just sees the pitcher's or the catcher's glove in front of him and is able to focus and do his job well. I remember that day. I was down the street from the Capitol before I went to the senator's office. And it felt like that. Like I was all anxious and there was a lot of people coming at me and I just kind of like silenced everything and was able to focus and give a speech and share and then shake the governor's hand and watch him sign into law what will help victims of California and not just give them justice, but it will prevent other children from being sold. And just what a cool moment for 18-year-old Jenna. Like, hey kid, I know it's rough, but you're going to do some cool shit. Don't worry.
That's so cool. It's really cool that you did that. And to me, it seems like such a bipartisan issue.
Yeah.
You know, did you get a chance to take a look at Tim Ballard's Sounds of Freedom?
You know, I haven't. I'm sure eventually I will. I have thoughts as a survivor and as somebody in the work, even though I haven't seen it. I don't know if you want to hear them.
Yeah, curious.
Yeah. It's I'll start with like the movie Taken. So when that movie came out, it was 2009, and my mom and dad went to the movie and saw it. And even though I didn't really understand that my experience was trafficking, I knew that what I survived, like when I watched the movie, I was triggered because it was clear that even though it looked different, similar things that had happened to me. And my mom and dad called me and said, Jenna, oh my gosh, like they were like paranoid. They're like, you can't travel around the country and especially by yourself. And these things happen. And I remember listening to them thinking, I already survived it, Mom. You know, it wasn't another few years before I came out with it and they learned that I did, but I had already lived through it. And so the problem with it is victims often come forward and say, I had no idea I was being trafficked because it's not what I saw in the movies. And I remember thinking that first night I was sold, the two people I wanted to call was my mom and the police. But I didn't understand, like I knew I was a victim for sure. I knew I was a victim of rape, but I didn't understand the money piece. What did that mean? Because I grew up with the same media as everyone else. Prostitution is Pretty Woman, and trafficking is that word you never really hear about, the documentary with a kid in another country chained to a radiator. Neither were what my situation looked like. Now, another thing is as a victim's advocate, you know, they're making a film about my story now, but I am an executive producer. I'm 17 years out. I have years of healing and I'm part of the project. And nobody's going to be profiting off of my story, which is basically re-exploiting me without my consent. So the victims in that movie, they're making so much money off of them. And there's a lot of things that have come out about Tim Ballard, which I don't dive into. I don't know. I can't comment on. It's not that it's not important when those movies come out, but it definitely does some damage for those working in anti-trafficking work in America. Because that's really, if you ask most people, I remember when I first moved here, I already knew the answer. I went to a CHP officer and said, so what's trafficking like in this area? And he goes, oh, that happens in other countries. He didn't even think it happened in America, let alone our city. So how are we going to identify and respond to victims if we're thinking that all this doesn't even happen? And so it's really just crucial that, okay, if we're going to talk about it brings awareness, great. But then there needs to be deeper conversations of the realities of the vulnerabilities in the culture and what it looks like in our communities, so we're not missing the kids and the women and men being sold here.
Yeah, it's interesting because it sounds like your view of this, even though you didn't watch the movie, you're viewing it from the victim, you know, as someone who's been trafficked. Obviously, even if I tried, I couldn't view that movie from that standpoint. But I got to tell you, as a parent, as an American, it raised so much awareness about what goes on at the southern border, how many kids are coming through, how we our government is delivering kids to potential traffickers thinking that they're family members. There's no background checks, things like that. I think Tim Ballard did an amazing job there. And it's interesting because Julia and I, we went to see that movie on a Saturday together. It was a very, very hard movie to watch, even though they don't show the explicit stuff. But we got two little boys. And next day, well, earlier that day, my kid, we were at a soccer tournament. And he's like, hey, I'm just going to go to the bathroom, the 10-year-old. I'm like, yeah, go to the bathroom. He does that all the time. No big deal. Well, he, after that movie, all these thoughts were like, this would be the prime place if somebody wanted to snatch him up. They could do it, and I wouldn't have any idea, just because of how many kids and parents, nobody would even know. And then we came to find out that there's like literally 15 minutes from us, there's been, they try to abduct the little girl. The way they did it was they hide in the bathroom when little girls come in. And this is like a place, like an arcade place, you know, little girl walks in, doesn't walk out. And then mom was smart enough to stand outside the bathroom. The guy was still in there hiding with the girl, and he tried to come out a little later, and the cops were right there because they called the cops. It was just, I don't know, it raised so much awareness for us. But it's interesting to hear your take on that movie.
Yeah, it's one of those things. I love the awareness. I love that it gets the conversation going. What I hope it leads to is more training, not just for law enforcement, hospitals, but schools. You know, we do so much conversation around what to keep kids safe. Like, hey, look both ways before you cross the street. Here's what to do in an earthquake and a fire. How many kids are being, you know, experience a fire at school versus how many are being sexually abused at home or groomed or on their Instagram talking to a stranger who they think is their friend, who actually has intent to cause them harm or to exploit them. They need to know what the grooming process looks like and what to hopefully prevent it from happening to them before they're lured out and trafficked. So that's what I hope it leads to, more of that.
That conversation is so needed because we're clueless, especially with Snapchat. These things disappear in 24 hours. You have no idea what the kids are doing, what they're talking about. That is, you're so right on with that. So Jenna, help me. I got to ask you, if there's somebody who's been dealing with trauma and hasn't gotten through, like if you were to write a book on how to get through trauma, because I feel like based on your story, you've had quite the journey. If I don't know if there's 5 steps or 10 steps, whatever that may be, like what would the steps be for someone who's coming out of a terrible situation and wants to get to a better situation?
Well, I think the first one is knowing that there is help, that there are helpers out there. Like, you know, for me, I didn't know, you know, there was one point that he opened the front door to the apartment and he said, leave, Jenna. If you want out so bad and you hate this so much, leave. And I started to walk out the door, and then I stopped and I went, where? And that was his manipulation of grading it into me, even though I had a supportive and loving family, even though there was police that would have helped, even though there was, you know, things like safe houses, and I didn't know. And I didn't know what would happen if I did reach out for help, because that's what you're thinking of as the victim is, okay, so if I reach out for help, am I going to be in trouble? Am I going to be, what's going to happen to me? And so the first one would be to know, yes, there are people, and not just people that will help, but people that have been trained and work extensively in this field that understand your trauma and your triggers and know the realities of life. Like there's a safe house in Monterey, and the first 6 months is healing, all different kinds of therapies. Second 6 months, okay, you've been trafficked since you were 12 and now you're 21. We know that you're not only have been trafficked and sold and have all that trauma you need to continue healing from, but you don't know basic life skills like how to set up a bank account, how to go to school, how to register for college, how to apply for an apartment. We're going to help you do all of that. So to know that those kind of resources are out there. And the next thing is, healing is hard. I think that's why that people, so many are like, don't want therapy or don't want to go talk about it, just want to like go through life. Just, I experience a trauma, whatever, I'm going to put it aside. Well, that trauma stays with you. My story is the perfect example. It's going to come out at some point, and it might not come out in pretty ways. It may be coming out in your daily life, to your partner, to your kids, right? So even though it's hard and scary to face the trauma, the work is well worth it, because then you can live an authentic, free, and peaceful life without healing. If I had never done this healing journey, even being away from my trafficker, I'd still be in chains, because I would be an angry person. And statistically, I'd probably be dead on drugs or in prison.
Mm.
And to do the healing work and continue it, I'll never stop going to therapy or my recovery or all the stuff I do. And that doesn't feel like a bummer to me. That feels exciting, because it relieves, like, oh, I don't have to like check this thing off. I just get to heal, and I'm just going to keep getting better and better. How cool is that? So my son, he may not appreciate it now, but when he's a grown man, I'm sure he'll appreciate that I did all the healing and could show up for him as the mom I am. My boyfriend, who I've been with 2.5 years, I'm sure he appreciates the healing. I'm sure he wouldn't be with me unless I had healed. And I'm able to show up for victims and show up for this work because of the healing. I can't express enough of that.
Have there been, so do you also work with women who have gone through the trauma, or are mainly focusing on training people who might deal with sex trafficked victims?
When I first started, I did a lot of like direct response and services. But the trainings and the speaking is what takes more of my time now. I'll still talk, like if a parent calls me and says, hey, my girl is talking to the stranger online or sending pictures or whatever, can you come chat with her? I'll do that all the time, or have community forums, things like that. And the Jenna Mckaye Foundation, hopefully it'll eventually grow where I don't have to be in it so much. I have other people running it where I can just go off and do my work. That would be great if that happens. So.
Yeah. Wow, Jenna, that's insane. Have you ever had anybody call you and say, hey, because of your training, we were able to do this, and say, were there any stories like that?
Yeah, a few. When you say that, one comes to mind. There's been times I've left trainings where it's been amazing. Like I'll have a cop crying, and a doctor, who seemed kind of bored, just wanted to go home, just came off a 12-hour shift, and he's like asking a bunch of questions, and I'm like, wow, this is working, right?
What do you
And then
say to them that they haven't heard of, or that's like an aha moment for them?
some haven't ever been trained on trafficking. I mean, it's newer within the last few years, and we're developing more into the hospital systems and I mean, but if a cop's 50 years old and he wasn't trained ever, and he has this old idea about trafficking where they're there by choice, giving them the training, like 3 days of training isn't even enough, to kind of reverse that thinking. And then there's times where I've left a training and like barely any people ask questions, and everyone's kind of straight faced, and I'm like, gosh, like that was exhausting. Was it even worth it? Did it do anything? And then I'll get a call. Like I did a fire department training with fire departments from all over Northern California. And the person that put on the training said a few months later, hey, this firefighter wanted me to let you know that he identified a victim based off what you shared in the training and got her help. And he said he would have never known that she was a victim, never noticed the signs otherwise. So that's when it's like you kind of go, oh, you have to trust in the ripple effect.
Wow. Well, thank you for all that you do. Is there anything that I did not ask you that you were hoping we would talk about?
No, you do a great job. I talked to Barb Allen yesterday. I love
That's my
she's so
girl.
great.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I just appreciate meeting people like you, that want to have the real honest conversations and get it out there.
Well, thank you for being so open. And I know some of the questions I asked were like tough, and I really appreciate you being very candid and open. I think that's going to help somebody. Where can people reach you? Like if a mom is seeing some signs with her child, or if maybe, somebody in my audience knows someone who's being detached from their family, something like, where can they reach out to you?
Just JennaMckaye.com. McKay has an E at the end. Facebook, Jenna Mckaye Foundation. And Instagram, Jenna Mckaye. And I share often other resources that are really, if you go to polaristproject.org, if like people are listening or curious about the statistics of trafficking, they run the human trafficking hotline and have a great resource website. But if if anybody listening, I fly anywhere and I'll speak or train, and just reach out on jennamckay.com.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for being here. It was a great conversation. I really
Thank
appreciate
you.
it. Thanks for all that you do.
I appreciate it.
Bye, everybody. We'll see you on the next episode.